Hey, it's Valentina V, back on 4-Minute Film School, and today I'm going to show you how to master exposure. Let's go! Film School 101, exposure. You'd think easy, right? Aperture, shutter speed, white balance. Well, it also has a lot to do with lighting, and this is the #1 way that you can make your footage look more professional. Like, you know what you're doing, you have a handle. So whether you're using natural light, you're using studio light, it's a moody vibe, it's a bright vibe, I'm here to help you master exposure. Let's take a look right here at Beam Studios LA. We're here at Beam LA's bunker set, a very cool, gritty location, lots of good texture and props, and the only natural lighting is coming from a row of windows. Even though the light isn't direct, if we point the camera at the windows, they will be overexposed. Because we're using these windows in our frame, it'll be a good challenge to get an even exposure. The first step is knocking down the exposure of the windows. Remember, that is a light source that we cannot control. So the only thing we can do is either close up our aperture, but we lose that depth of field, or we can add an ND filter, a neutral density filter, to the front of the lens, therefore bringing that exposure down to acceptable levels. Because the main light is coming from the windows, it is giving our subject very much a silhouette, and we want to augment that light by doing a far side key. We want it to be soft because the windows aren't creating really hard light. So we have a bounce here and a 300D on the floor. It is bouncing directly up and then onto our subject. We set it to be at 100%, so it is very, very bright, so it can complement the exposure of the windows. Because we really want to shape the light on the face and control exactly which window light we're using in the scene, we are using black floppies to block off any additional windows that are behind them so that those aren't affecting our scene and we can really control what's going on our subject's face. Because we can't put any type of light outside the window, we are faking a window slash by rigging a 300D up in the rafters. Adding that Fresnel is going to make the light more directional and give us that nice beam of light through the entire room across from the top right corner to the bottom left corner, giving it a little bit more texture in the background. And lastly, we fogged the whole room for 3 reasons. #1, it makes the bright spots and the dark spots not too concentrated, so it's a little bit more of an even exposure. #2, it gives more dynamic range to the shot, so we can have more to play with in color correction. And #3, all that fog is gonna pick up the light particles of that background slash, making it look like the light is actually coming from the windows. Overall, the whole goal of this shot is to not have anything too underexposed or too overexposed while still retaining the dimension that is required for a moody, dramatic feel. Let's see it all put together. Now we are in Beam LA's White Cyc studio, and we don't have window light to contend with, so we get to set up the shot exactly the way that we want it. The first thing is expose for the person's face. In this case, I decided to go with a more sidey light instead of a frontal light in order to still have a little bit more dimension and drama, but I needed to add additional lighting on the other side to fill that out and not have it be so contrasted. I could have clamped something to the C-stand as a bounce, but luckily the studio comes with this mirror here, and a mirror is pretty much the best, most direct way that you can bounce light because the light is going to go directly onto the face. It also provides really nice specular highlights on the face, giving a nice roll off. But when you have a sidey light and a side bounce, you lose that dimension in the eyes. So for that, I introduced just a pop for an eye light. So the eye light is just a simple MC. It is magnetized. You can just stick it on a C-stand, and not only does it give you more dimension in your eyes, but it also wraps that light around the face a little bit more. Now that I have my subject properly exposed, it is time to expose for the background. This might be a good vibe. Maybe you're going for a darker background, a brighter foreground, but if you're looking for a more even exposure, throw a light on the back. In this case, it is a 300D2. I didn't need to put it on any type of stands because number one, it would actually get in the frame if it was too high. And number two, the beam angle is wide enough to cover the entire background if I just put it on to the legs of a C stand. It is currently at 18%, and that's all I need. Any brighter, it would actually blow it out and not have the proper exposure across the frame. But with this 3-light setup, I have a dynamic interview shot and a nice pop of light in the background. So let's see it all come together. When you are talking about exposure, it's actually all about lighting and not so much about your camera. You can mess up the same way with a cinema camera as you can with your phone. Here we are trying to match the exposure of our cinema camera with an iPhone and a moment anamorphic lens on it. Now, any type of recording program on your phone, first of all, is going to expose for the lightest part of the image, in this case, the background. That's fine as long as it's not clipping. Programs like Filmic Pro are going to give you the ability to choose that exposure and make sure that it's not too bright and not blowing out. But then because the sensor is smaller and less sensitive, it might not pick up that same intensity in the foreground light. So what we did here, simply increase the intensity from 10% to 20% of that foreground light, and boom, the exposure is matched on the foreground and background. Let's take a look. In order to master exposure, there are 3 things you need to keep in mind. Number 1, expose for the things that you can't control, namely natural light, windows. You can do that by adding ND to your camera, by stopping down the aperture, or by simply adding more light. Number 2, underexposing is better than overexposing. You don't want to clip in your highlights because that data is a lot harder to recover than the data stored in your shadows. So be a little conservative on your highlights. And number 3, use your camera as a tool, but don't rely on it. You can still get a beautiful image no matter what camera you're shooting with. Cinema camera, iPhone, as long as you know how to master exposure with your lighting. This week's common question, what is your favorite exposure tool in your camera? Histograms, zebras, false color? Let us know what it is and how you use it for a chance to win an Aputure M9 Lite. That's it for this episode. If you enjoyed it, please give this video a like and subscribe to our channel. Turn on notifications. We want to hear from you. Let's be friends. I'm Valentina from the A-Team, and happy shooting.